Hey there, beautiful people. You are listening to Green Mountain Mornings on KVT Talk, where Brattleboro listens. I'm your host, Olga Peters, 22 minutes past the top of the hour. I want to remind folks that BCTV is in the studio today filming this segment of Green Mountain Mornings. It will be broadcast on BCTV later today, and broadcast of Green Mountain Mornings tonight is sponsored by Brattleboro Savings and Loan. Hey, Randy.
Yes.
What's happening with the Iran nuclear deal these days?
Well, the answer is we're screwed. As planned, that is.
Yes. Yes, and you know this because we had a guest come to the community and speak at the Wyndham World Fairs Council.
Yeah, this was an interesting get. I mean, they have a knack for people coming in to talk about issues right when the subject is at the peak of interest in the news. And this was a case of someone who was involved in negotiations between the U.S. and Iran and the other major European powers. His name is Syed Hossein Mousavian. He's teaching at Princeton now. Mm-hmm. But he was there to say, kind of do an overview of what was happening. And he had a speech prepared because May 12th was the date when President Trump said the decision was going to be made to pull out of the agreement.
Right.
Or the day after his talk was scheduled. Trump did it 3 days before his talk was scheduled, so he pretty much had to rip up his speech and start over again.
Wow.
And the main thing is that it's just not a good thing for for the United States unilaterally ripping up an agreement with another country on rather flimsy pretext, then bullying the other members, signatories to the agreement, to also not abide by it.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things I have to say about the Iran deal is it was not perfect, but it had been worked on for many years by many different countries, and I think it's pretty profound that all these countries were able to come to an agreement. And,
I mean, when was the last time Russia and China agreed on anything?
Right. Exactly. Point in fact. And to rip up all that work just seems very dicey and dangerous to me.
Yeah, that is the key, dicey and dangerous, because it's an area that's fraught with all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the few times when a crisis was averted in the Middle East without a war. That was done through diplomacy. And diplomacy's hard work. It takes time and patience to make it happen. But you had the main hitters on the UN Security Council, so the U.S., the U.K., France, Germany, and Russia and China coming together and as on this deal. And for the Iranians, it was a good deal because they got back the money that was frozen after the Iranian revolution back in 1978. They got a chance to sell their oil onto the market, which explains why our gas prices are going up. They had a chance to get back into the world economy, and I think the young people in Iran are not going to take kindly to getting kicked again by the United States. Mm-hmm.
Now, did Mousavian talk about why this deal, or ripping up this deal, makes it dangerous for the rest of the world? Because I think he actually used the word dangerous, didn't he?
Well, because of the idea that this was a big step forward to nuclear nonproliferation. Mm-hmm. That Iran, which didn't have a nuclear weapon, never had a nuclear weapon, but was certainly on its way to getting one, decided this is okay. We'll stop right here, and agreed upon that. Because as we see in North Korea this week, the lesson countries like North Korea have learned is if you want the United States to take you seriously, get a nuke. Mm-hmm. And if you give your nukes away, the lesson you learn is Muammar Gaddafi in the meat in the meat refrigerator.
Right. Well, at least if you let John Bolton anywhere near the scene.
Well, that was Hillary's deal.
Oh, that's true.
And Obama helped that. Don't blame John Bolton for that, but it's going to be.
Oh, I'm not. I'm blaming him for the rhetoric now.
Well, for that, but yeah, if you don't want to be, Gaddafi turned in his nuclear weapons and thought he was okay, but he ended up losing power, getting overthrown anyways.
Right. You know, that is something that concerns me about how the U.S. operates in the international field in general is I do realize things change, and so sometimes promises have to change too, but we are not always very good at following through on what we say we will follow through on.
Or when we follow through on something, it's not a good thing. As Savian pointed out, the U.S. and Iran had a good relationship for more than 100 years, up until 1953, when the CIA overthrew their democratically elected government and put the Shah of Iran in power.
Right.
And even after that, after the Iranian Revolution, after 9/11, Iran offered to help us out with dealing with Al-Qaeda, because they're certainly not friends of Al-Qaeda, and or ISIS. And Iran has always been a power in that corner of the Middle East for centuries. And they're not going to take a back seat just because a certain orange-hued Cheeto of a president doesn't like them.
Right. Yeah, they have bigger fish to fry or Cheetos to fry.
And the Russians and the Chinese are still dealing with them. They're buying their oil, they're making deals, and don't forget, most of the world's pomegranates come from Iran.
So if you like your palm oil.
Yes.
So we have to go to break, but quickly, Randy, did Musavian say anything about next steps that the U.S. could take?
It doesn't look good, and I think the next step would be hope for a different president.
I think that's the next step for a lot of people in this listening area. Not everyone, but a lot of people in this listening area.
But that and
but
hope
that's going to take time.
Hope the Europeans stay firm and agree that they're not knuckle under the bullying that the Trump administration is doing.
But that brings us to another sale in the area after many, many years, Maple Valley.
Yes, 18 years it's been on the market.
Oh, my gosh.
And somebody's bought it. We got the news release from Sally Fagley over at Masiello Group, saying that it got sold. And, good luck to whoever bought it. I don't know what they're going to plan on doing with it. It was assessed at $1.4 million. It was bought for $145,000. And
wow.
And, it could still work as a ski area if you're willing to put in some work and willing to put in some... take some losses, but I think the folks in Magic Mountain over in Londonderry have shown that if you put in the effort and you have a loyal base that are willing to support it, you can resurrect an old ski area and be successful at it.
Well, something like Maple Valley, I look at as a great place for families in the sense that it would be a really easy place for kids to learn to ski.
Yeah, and that's what places like that used to serve as, like the old Mount Tom down in Holhut, which also had night skiing like Maple Valley does.
Right.
So
night skiing.
Night skiing, go leave work and go take a few runs. So it was good for if you were planning a trip to up north of Killington or one of the other big ski areas. You had a place to get loose before you went and took your ski trip. So. Getting younger people into skiing and boarding is important, and without going broke. And that's the big thing is that the little ski hill at Memorial Park, that the job they do in getting young people turned on to skiing and wakeboarding and perhaps even jumping. There's talk of getting a little ski jump there.
Oh, fun.
For the kids to learn on.
Well, I look forward to seeing what happens with Maple Valley. And or they could also even follow some of the efforts of Berkshire East down in Charlemont, who has put in some more 3-seasoned amenities. Like, I think there's a zip line there now. There's some hiking trails. So people are accessing it all 4 seasons.
Yeah, Bromley's certainly done that with their alpine slide and such. But the sticking point with Maple Valley is those neighbors that are next to it. So they're the ones that complain about the noise from the snow guns and the lights from the night skiing and everything else. And it's going to take a lot of work to come up with a plan to convince everybody that it's not going to be. They're not going to be on people's lawns.
We are back, and this is Green Mountain Mornings on KVT Talk, where Brattleboro listens. I'm your host, Olga Peters, 38 minutes past the top of the hour. Hey there, Randy Holhut from the Commons.
Hello again.
Hello again. So glad that you are hanging on through the commercial breaks to talk to us.
Yes, and that new kid that's taken over for Roland, the headless BCT producer.
Yes, Mr. Bryan is in the house, the new. You can't see him, listeners, but he is sitting against the wall, kind of learning from Roland. Yeah, say hi to the camera.
Well, the good news there is that they're getting someone with some experience there, and because BCT Fact TV up in BF doesn't have quite all the toys that BCTV has, but they do a good job up there.
They do, and I'm going to speak on Roland's behalf, but when he mentioned to me that he was leaving, one of the things we talked about is how are you going to find someone to replace you, because community television is so unique because someone needs to have the technical background, but they also have to have the background to work with the public and help train new producers and teach classes and do a lot of things like that. So it's not a single focus kind of job. You need to be able to wear multiple hats. It's a very definite skill set. So congratulations, Brian. And congratulations, Roland.
But it's been so fun watching Roland grow up before our eyes. We knew him when he was just a little waif on the television. And now look at him.
See, we can say we knew him when.
Yes, we can.
Let's change gears before we embarrass Roland any further.
Yeah, he's probably bright red right now.
Talk about elections. We've been talking about them a lot on this show, but it just bears repeating because this race is shaping up on the local level very differently than in past years.
Yeah, they're actually candidates.
Yay! And we will have to make choices at the primary.
Yeah, but it's not just rubber stamping the one person who's the incumbent.
Mm-hmm. I am very excited by this, I have to say.
Yeah, so that's been interesting, and in Wyndham 4, the Putney, Dummerston, Westminster district, having 2 candidates for running for the Democratic nomination, in addition to Mike Marickis, who was rumored briefly that he wasn't going to run, but I thought he's going to be there forever. So
he's pretty dedicated.
That rumor wasn't going to work, but. I wrote about one of them this week, Nader Hassim, who's a very interesting guy.
Yes. Tell us a little bit more about him. I think I've met him on a couple occasions. I'm trying to get him on the show. Our schedules just haven't lined up.
Well, since he's working, I think, second or third shift up there, up at the Westminster Barracks, because he's a state trooper, which was a first, as best we can tell. There hasn't been anybody else from the Vermont State Police who's been in the legislature.
Ah, okay.
So he would need to, get permission from his superiors to take a leave of absence every session between January and May, or however long it takes to do his job. He's second generation American. His parents are from the Middle East. Mom's from Mom's from Iran, Dad's from Egypt. They met like many do in Boston when going to school.
Oh, that's cool.
A really strong social justice streak in him that motivated him to go into public service. In this case, being a police, being in law enforcement. He briefly thought about being a lawyer or a teacher. But he had a real strong call to service, which motivated him to do it. And just some different perspectives on the issues. I'll be talking with the other candidate, Cindy Jerome, later this morning, and also, not different in another way, but she's been the town moderator in Dummerston for the last few years, and she was on the select board before that, and she one of the senior administrators at Holhut. She stepped down last week to concentrate on the campaign.
Okay.
And so, she's definitely a known quantity in Dummerston, and also a graduate of the Emerge Vermont program.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Well, there's a lot of Emerge Vermont candidates running around out there. Emily Kornheiser, who's running against Valerie Stewart. You spoke with her a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
Is an Emerge graduate, and of course, everyone's favorite Senate Majority Leader, Becca Bohm. Becca Ballant is a graduate. The candidate in waiting, Ann Braden, is a graduate. And, there's the number of non-traditional candidates, i.e. not white guys, who are running for public office, not just in Vermont, but all over America, is really amazing to see.
Well, I've said this before, but I really truly believe it, that I think one of the silver linings we're going to get from this Trump administration and Bernie not getting the Democratic nomination is that I think people who never would have run were galvanized by these events, and are seeing people throwing their hats in the ring in response to wanting to change the world and not being happy with what we got in the last election.
Well, it's more like it's nothing happens unless you're at, or Madeline Cunan's favorite aphorism, that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to be at the table.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing the people who haven't been at the table there to help make policy. When the pictures that came out, well, I guess it was last year, the Trump administration, it was a congressional panel on women's health that had no women on the panel.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that photograph. Yes.
Yeah. It's things like that remind people. Or I guess it was somewhere else who was was it West Virginia, I think it was, an activist who was trying to speak in an open session and was asking questions about pay and benefits and where campaign contributions were coming from, and she got dragged out by the cops. She ran for office and ran for the legislature and won her primary. Yes.
Yep.
I mean, it's things like that. It's the veterans that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan who are running as Democrats for various posts around the country.
Yes. Yeah, I noticed that. I was reading an AP article recently, and they were noting the number of women in the military who are running specifically.
Yes, her name escapes me, but in Kentucky, she was one of the first fighter pilots in the Navy. And her opening campaign commercial played the fact up that she was told repeatedly that she couldn't do it.
Right.
And letting people know that chicks can wear leather jackets too with wings on them. And yes, I've landed a plane on a carrier deck. Can you?
Right. Right.
And not just a plane, but a fighter jet.
And have you heard of any other rumblings in the background for people who are still considering to run, but maybe they haven't declared yet?
Well, John Margolis of Vermont Digger had a piece yesterday or the day before talking about Rebecca Holcomb, the education secretary.
That would explain a lot.
To throw her hat in the ring for governor for the Democratic nomination. And interesting if it's true, but the Democratic primary is still pretty wide open.
Yeah.
You can't say there's any one of the four declared candidates who's a favorite.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I think, Phil Scott helped them out
just a little bit, especially
with his vetoing the minimum wage bill and vetoing the family leave bill.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's a good segue to switch gears and to talk about the legislature. I had Senator Pro Tem Tim Ash on the show yesterday, and one of the things he said that stood out to me is he thinks the governor may have, he didn't quite use these words, but shot himself in the foot by declaring a veto before actually calling the special session or actually vetoing the tax and budget bills.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether that was his decision or the man they call Governor Gibbs. Right. Jason Gibbs, who seems to be the Svengali behind Phil Scott and the one calling the shots.
Mm-hmm.
But it still looks really dumb.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up an interesting point with Phil Scott. We don't know that Jason Gibbs is actually pulling the strings, but here's the deal. Scott's form of leadership as governor has diverged so dramatically from what people knew him as lieutenant governor, as this man who could negotiate and bring people to the table and kind of be a calming presence. As a governor, he has not held that role, and it's such a departure that I think people are assuming that it has to be someone else pulling the strings, because why would this man we knew as a bridge builder be pulling all these stunts? I mean, 2 legislative sessions in a row have kind of ground to the halt at the end because he pulls out a last-minute education thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense to do that unless what you're trying to do is what's known in the blogosphere as hippie punching. You do something just for the pure sake of ticking off liberals and Democrats. Not that it's good policy or anything, but it feels good to punch a hippie in the face. Metaphorically, that is.
Yeah, does not lead to good policy, though.
No, it doesn't. But
no.
That's where we're at right now with the modern conservative movement. That's all about hippie punching. Right.
Which, I have to say, as a journalist, it of course leads to really great headlines. However, as someone who cares about her community, I find this really frustrating because I want my lawmakers to build good policy.
Yes.
I really don't have patience for the drama.
Yes, and it's all about drama, as we've seen it in Washington right now, and government by Twitter feed. And, wondering, each morning whether you're going to be able to get up and enjoy the morning.
Yes. Which is why on the weekends I don't turn on the news until much, much later in the day.
No, that's why I turn to the sports section first. But we're hoping that disease doesn't infect things in Montpelier.
Yes, we're hoping, but boy, does it seem like there are some definite political games being played.
Well, there's nothing wrong with political games in politics. It's just politics is just the give and take of policy disagreements and finding the common ground, which makes good policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily cracking a chair over somebody's head.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think the games that Phil Scott is playing right now, or his administration is playing? How do you think they'll play out?
Well, it's hard to talk about affordability if you've going to veto two things that would do a lot to make Vermont more an affordable place to live,
mm-hmm.
and that is paying people for their labor,
mm-hmm.
and offering some assistance with the biggest impediment to a lot of women in the workforce, and that's child care.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for that matter, with family leave, elder care, which is a big issue now.
Yes.
As our state grows older, those, and also putting forth a plan to supposedly to save money for education, that when it's subject to a little bit of analysis, ends up costing more money. But you get rid of teachers, and that's a good, some hippie punching.
Well, that whole ratio thing, it's one of those things that looks great on paper from 64,000 miles up, but it does not discuss or does not factor in what is happening at the ground level. And let's face it, our schools are dealing with students who have higher needs.
And it's not just the students with higher needs. The people that are going to get laid off are going to be the janitors, the secretaries, the paraeducators,
mm-hmm.
the cafeteria workers, people like that.
Right.
And you're going to you want something and these are your neighbors.
Yeah.
They're working there. They got jobs. You can put them out in the street to save $10 on your property tax bill?
Yeah, and it will probably come down with voters along the same lines for Scott, which is, how do you define affordability? And Scott seems to be defining it much differently, at least than I would define it, for better or for worse. Any last-minute thoughts before I let you go, Mr. Randy?
No, because I know the clock is ticking inexorably toward 9 o'clock.
It is. I'm so glad you're a clock watcher. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Randy.
Thank you, and have a good weekend.
You too.